meeting of the zoning providing board is meeting to order. Jill, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. James Manning,
Here.
Anthony Brunetti,
Here.
Chris Ullman,
Here.
Tom Callahan,
Present.
Ellen Corneau, here. Excellent. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum?
Thank you. The other two members are absent, of course. just for housekeeping. First item on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from April 25th, 2023. What is the board's pleasure?
Move to accept and place on file?
Second that.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, that motion carries.
Abstain, Mr. Chairman, I wasn't at the meeting. I have to abstain, I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay. 401. Tom abstained.
Mr. Chairman, I'm wearing a couple hats today. Who made those motions?
Tony made the motion. Chris
Thank
seconded
you.
it. Okay. So first item on the agenda is Odell, Slackham, lot 167-81, located at 25 Shore Road. Okay, you're on the floor.
Hi, thank you for continuing this.
Yeah, why don't we, well, I think this, we'll start fresh.
Okay. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last.
Okay, it's Gail Hallock, Hallock, -CYR.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is a triangular lot in Breakwater Village, and it's tiny. And so we had to shoehorn in this house into this triangular shaped lot. And so we've stayed within all of the parameters that we're supposed to stay in for Breakwater Village. The reason I think we're back here is because the bottom left corner is in the Coastal Resources Management overlay, and that wasn't stated in the previous project summary. But this is, we're trying to get relief from the section 4.8.1.6 to tear down an existing one-story dwelling and construct a two-story dwelling in this location. So we are under the FAR. Our deck is also under the required sun deck size, and the height is less than 26 feet. We did put in the 600 square feet of pervious parking, and it's just that heavy dotted line on the left that is encroaching the CRMC. All of the building is above flood level. In fact, the entire lot is above flood level. And so we don't, even though it, technically is, in the flood zone, the lot itself is well above flood. And we will comply with all of the conditions that are for review. That we will comply with all of those conditions. In fact, some of them have already happened. Some of the things that were asked to be submitted have already been submitted.
So if everyone recalls, I think, were we all here for this?
I was not.
You're not, all right. It fell in the Coastal Resources Overlay District, and that's why it was continued, because it was just a small portion of the lot. That's why it had to be continued to this evening. So There's two sections of relief is being requested, 4.4 and 4.8.1.6.
Oh, thank you, I'm sorry.
On the 4.4, could you just point out where the 114 feet is? That's 114 feet right there, across the whole lot line?
It's just this corner here.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But is it 114 square feet, or is it 114 feet?
114 linear feet.
Linear feet, okay.
I mean, there's a road between the coastal feature and the house itself, so.
Yeah, it's across the street from the water, and there's quite a lot of vegetation and stuff on the side of the road towards the water.
Yeah, that corner, I apologize, don't have my glasses. That corner, the square section that it's to the
Touching,
left, what is that?
that is parking. So we
Parking.
need to have 3 parking spaces. So we have the one on the left, and then we have 2 along the top.
Okay, got it, there's parking there, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Gabe.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone that would like to speak in favor of this proposal? Okay, hearing none. No one? Is there anyone who is opposed that would like to speak? Okay. Chair would entertain a motion that we close this public hearing. So moved.
Second?
Who made the,
I did.
Tony and Chris? Tony
Yes.
made it, Chris seconded.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any discussion?
One
Hearing none, all
moment,
those
Mr.
in
Chairman.
favor?
Mr. Almond, you weren't here for the original public hearing.
We didn't hear anything.
We didn't hear, since it wasn't
Thank you.
noticed, this
Yeah.
is the beginning.
Got it, thank you.
So that's why I had Gail sworn again, just, we'd start fresh,
Thank you.
so. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed, that motion carries 5-0. What is the board's pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, with respect to Odell Tax Assessor's Plat Map M, Lot 167-81, 25 Shore Road, Breakwater Village, I'd like to enter into the record the propose the following findings of fact. The applicant proposes to, quite all right, proposes to demolish and rebuild a 2-story single-family dwelling with a deck and a patio at the above referenced property. The proposed improvements of the project were reflected in the site plan that the board reviewed tonight. The findings of fact that is entered into the staff memo dated June 27, 2023, findings of facts A through L. I'd like the board to adopt those as findings of fact of this project. Mr. Chairman, the applicant was represented by Gail. I've forgotten your last name. I apologize.
Halleck, Sear.
I'm sorry?
Halleck.
Halleck, okay. Was represented by the architect, Gail Halleck. Ms. Halleck presented the proposed site plan, noting that as I said, the demolish and build. We've provided for the 3 parking spaces that are necessary on the lot. It does fall into CMRC jurisdiction for relatively minor portion of the lot, and so they need relief from section 4.4 for the variance and a special use permit, and also need relief requested for 4.816 for the special use permit for the construction of a 2-story dwelling. The planning board reviewed this recommendation and deemed it to be complete and in conformance with the land use provisions of the town's master plan. They recommended that the project be approved, recommended that the zoning board approve the project on a motion of 3-0. I don't know that there are any other findings of fact that I overlooked, but I'm happy to entertain any amendments that people might have. If not, Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt those findings as our findings of fact.
One second.
Motion has been made and properly seconded by Mr. Brunetti to enter the findings of fact into the record. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, that motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Chairman, with respect to, again, Odell Tax Assessor's Plat Map M Lot 16781, 25 Shore Road, Breakwater Village, I move that the board provide the relief requested in its entirety, 114-foot variance and special use permit for section 4.4, a special use permit for the construction of a two-story dwelling at section 4.8.1.6. The board, in reviewing this application, found that the applicant, the hardship on which the applicant seeks relief is not due to the unique characteristics of the subject land or structure, excuse me, is not due, right, correct? And not due to the physical and economic.
Is due.
Is due, okay, that's right, I thought, there we go. The board also found that the hardship is not the result of any prior action of the applicant. This is essentially a building that's reached the end of its useful life, needs to be renewed in its entirety. The board finds that the granting of the requested variance is consistent with the general character of the neighborhood there. In fact, that it had been reviewed by the Architectural Review Authority for Breakwater Village and had been deemed consistent with that. As I said, it had been deemed by the planning board to be consistent with the land use provisions of the town's comprehensive plan. Based on the record, we believe this is the least relief necessary. The architect, in fact, has done a superb job in basically positioning this building on a very difficult site to redevelop with a quality project. Based on the following, and based on the evidence in the record, the board found that the hardship suffered by the owner would be more than a mere inconvenience if we did not grant the relief. With respect to the special use permit, the board said that the use will comply with all the applicable requirements and development and performance standards of section 4.6 and section 7 of the zoning ordinance. That is, as we mentioned earlier, is consistent with the general purpose and intent of the comprehensive plan. It will serve the public's convenience and welfare by essentially renewing this property. That it does not present a threat to the public health, safety, and morals in general welfare of the community. And that is that it will not substantially permanently injure the appropriate use of the surrounding property, and it provides for access to air, light, views, public access to water body, rivers and streams, and the conservation of energy and energy efficiency. So, Mr. Chairman, for those reasons, I move that the board provide the relief as requested.
One second.
Tom, would you like
Point of
to
order.
include the
Conditions?
conditions?
Yes, I would like to include the conditions, and I'll note for the record that the applicant has indicated that they review the conditions and have found those conditions to be acceptable to them.
Conditions 1 through.
I'm sorry, conditions 1 through 5.
I'll amend my second.
Mr. Chairman, point of order?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't know if that's the right way to do this, but,
Well, I'll ask for discussion, so,
oh, okay.
okay. A motion has been made and properly seconded again by Mr. Benetti to grant the relief requested with conditions. Is there any discussion? Alan?
I have a question. So, Mr. Callahan went through standards for both variance and special use permit, is that right? So, but there's no variance being requested here, is that right? Or is that
Well,
wrong?
There is a variance. It's
There
the
is a variance.
under
Okay,
section
okay,
4.4.
Okay.
Section
Yep,
4.4.
got it.
Okay?
Okay. All set.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion carries 5-0. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice things you said too.
Okay. Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is Point Tax Assessors Plat O, lot 117, located in G. Mr. Callahan, good evening.
Mr. Chairman, good to see you. How are you?
Good. I was wondering how long it'd be before we saw you.
Yeah, it's a little while.
His timeout is over.
Tag back in.
You have the floor, sir.
Oh, thank you. So prefer us to get the podium, or does it matter?
Yeah, whatever, I mean, whatever you're comfortable there.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for your time tonight. James Callahan, Callahan, 3 Brown Street, in Guilford. Here tonight representing Carl and Linda Point to my left. Carl and Linda, you might recognize, are longtime Narragansett residents. They've lived here for decades and raised their family here. They reside at 6 Jean Street. 26, I'm sorry. 26 Jean Street. It's one of those streets in Narragansett you probably don't go on unless you have a reason to. It's off Lambert Street, which is near the Rotary, and the Points house at the very end of Jean Street. And I was talking to the Points earlier tonight, and we believe that Jean Street formerly, at some point, may have gone all the way down.
To Point Judith Road. On paper, I've seen.
Yeah, hold on, sorry. Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry,
No, wait, wait,
Yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
right.
Yeah.
We'll go
Yeah,
through
okay.
with the Linda too. So I think that Jean Street all the way down to Point Judith Road, through where Sweet Meadow Court is, the condominiums, and the Washington Trust Bank. But at some point, that road was stopped, and the Points lost some frontage in the sale. Not to say that the sale wasn't purposeful, but I don't think that the owners meant to get rid of their required frontage at that point, and that was not by these points. But in any event, this property abuts the medical buildings in the Rotary, Washington Trust Bank, and the Sweet Meadows Court apartment complex. And we're here asking for the Points to be allowed to utilize their home for a 2-unit or a 2-family dwelling. And there's a significant backstory to that process, and I'll get to that in a minute. Basically, it's an R10 zone. 2 families are allowed, but there are certain dimensional requirements. 20,000 square feet of lot space and 150 feet of frontage are both requirements which the Points don't have at Jean Street. We're asking for relief from the 20,000 square foot lot requirement, as the lot is 10,454 square feet, and the frontage is currently 119 feet, where 150 is required. Interestingly, the Points have been renting out this space in their home as like an in-law apartment for nearly 3 decades without issue. And they've been renting through Narragansett Housing, which is in this building about 25 feet that way. Not that they're renting out the house for this long is like a great thing in their respect, but they are using this house to rent to an underserved population in Narragansett who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford to live here. And this only came up because they rented the house to a lady who got a friend. The friend and the lady didn't get along anymore. The Points didn't go along with them. They tried to get him to leave. I think it was some kind of maybe an eviction process. And as part of that, he complained to the town, which led to Wayne coming over, I think, and seeing what's going on, and a violation, I think, being issued. I'm not sure if violation was issued.
A letter.
A letter.
Just a letter.
So obviously, they probably wouldn't be here unless all that transpired, but that's no excuse or no justification. At this point, the Points are trying to legalize this to still allow it to be rented through Narragansett Housing, but they can't do that unless the 2-family is legalized. So theoretically, they could rent out the space short-term or, you know, month to month or something like that and not have an issue, but that's not what they want to do. They want to legalize it and go through Narragansett Housing because it has so much success with prior renters. I think they've had over 30 years, maybe 4 or 5, 4 or 5 people.
Jim, I think the point should be at this,
Yeah, I'm almost
to
there.
have a, well,
Sure.
why don't we have them sworn, that way if it goes on the record,
Please raise your
they
right
can go
hand.
on
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
Please state your name and spell your last.
Linda Point, P-O-I-N-T.
Thank you, and you.
Carl Point, P-O-I-N-T.
Thank you.
And just to finish up, ironically, if they had just rented the house out to 3 individuals, or even 4, they would have no issues. But since they live there and they're renting out to a 1-bedroom to someone else, it raises this problem. They're not asking for an enlargement of the house, any setback relief, and no FAR relief. Nothing's going to change at the house at all. It's just that they want to be able to rent it out through Narragansett Housing. So this one asked if Carl Point could be sworn in, which he has been. So Carl, where do you live?
26 Jean Street, Narragansett.
And for how long?
We've been there since May 15th, 1992.
And you live there with your wife Linda?
Yes.
And can you describe to the board the layout of the home?
It's a split-level house. You walk into the front door, or the back door. You walk into a kitchen, and then a living room. You go up about 6 steps, and then there's a bathroom and 3 bedrooms. And underneath the 3 bedrooms and the bathroom is the in-law apartment. And then if you can go down another stretch, that's where the basement is, which is underneath the kitchen and living room.
It's a tri-level.
Tri-level.
And the in-law is a 1-bedroom?
1 bedroom, yes.
About 500 square feet. It's tiny.
Has its own kitchen facilities?
Yes.
Kitchen.
What did you say?
Own kitchen facilities?
Very small kitchen.
Is there a separate entrance? for
Yes,
the
Yes.
it
in-law
has a
apartment?
private entrance.
And is it fair to say there's ample parking on site?
Yes, there's parking for 4 cars.
Over 1,039 square feet.
And have you always utilized Narragansett Housing for the rentals?
Yes, when we bought the house, it came with this woman, Mrs. Woodard, and we told the people who were selling us the house that she would be allowed to stay there.
And generally, is it fair to say you've enjoyed positive relationships with the tenants you've had?
Yes, yes, that's the last one.
And as I mentioned, there was an issue with your last tenant,
Yes,
and that was not a person you rented to? Or on a lease?
oh, we did, we went through housing.
But there was a second person, right?
Yes, her
Well,
boyfriend.
her boyfriend, she was allowing him to stay more than 1 night a week, which we kind of agreed to. He could stay once a week, but he lived in a trailer on his truck, and it was a cold winter, so he was there a lot. We just asked him to leave and not take advantage of this, because you're not supposed to be able to, like, have a second person on Section 8 housing.
And in your time renting, has the home ever been the subject of a noise complaint
No,
or a party sticker complaint?
no,
And conceivably, you could rent out on a short-term basis,
yes,
but you don't want to do that.
no.
And
You have to, like, you know, we had an Airbnb for 2 years after this issue, and, you know, you still have to go in and clean every week, or twice a week, so.
And the people you rent to, you prefer to do it for a year-long lease, is that fair to say?
Right, that's how the lease goes in Narragansett.
And you wouldn't have any objection to any conditions that limit you to 1 bedroom or no further expansion of the home?
No.
And you're asking for this relief due to the size of your lot?
Yes,
And do you think this variance request will alter the general character of the area?
no, not at all.
And is it fair to say you think that the neighbor has a similar situation?
Yes,
Okay. And do you feel this relief will impair the intent of the zoning ordinance
no.
or the Narragansett Comprehensive Plan? And is it fair to say that you help provide some much-needed housing in the area?
Yes,
And what kind of tenants have your work as your tenants done in the past?
well, the first woman, Mrs. Woodard, and her husband, her husband had died before we bought the house, but they were like housekeepers for a few different families in town. The next woman was on, I'm sorry, yeah, she was there for 12 years with us, and then the next woman was on disability, but she was able to take care of her grandchildren so her daughter could go to college, and she became a nurse. Then we had a young man who's in his 30s who had learning disabilities, and he worked in the restaurant in a lot of kitchens in town, and then the last woman worked in retail.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's about it.
Any questions, Mr. Point?
Sure, the first woman was there 12 years, second person was there how long?
11.
Yeah, and actually, the person, Mrs. Woodard, we had gone to dinner with, there was a grad student that was living in this house, he invited us to his house. And Mrs. Woodard and her husband were living there in 1985. So she was there for a long time.
Gotcha. And the third person was there how long?
I'm sorry?
The third person was there
The
how
third
long?
person was there for 2 years.
And the last?
2 years.
Two. Another question, and I missed, I think it was part of the testimony. You ran an Airbnb out of this property?
Yes.
You did.
Can I speak?
Help me understand that.
After we, can I speak? After we received the letter from Wayne,
Mhm.
I had written, it wasn't from Wayne, it was actually from David Antonelli. And I called and I spoke with Wayne for a little while, and then I wrote a letter, because our part of that was that we needed to respond to the complaint. So I called, that was my response, and then I wrote a letter explaining what happened with this severely abusive person that was living in our home illegally. So I was told at the time that to compile all of my information and submit it to housing and to the building inspector's office of our history working with the town since 1992. When we bought the house, I was young and very naive, and we went and we met with housing with Mike and Christine and Vicky, and first thing I said to them was, now, what's going on with this? Like, the house isn't like legal, but it's an in-law apartment and it's rented, so how does this work? And I was told that there was a great need for housing in Narragansett, and that because this apartment had been rented through town, through housing, since way before we bought it, that they sort of just grandfathered it in. And there are a lot of accessory apartments that do this.
Understand.
Yes.
My question is more
Yeah.
specific to the Airbnb portion.
Oh, okay, so after I talked to Wayne, and at that point, I was very frustrated. I needed surgery on my back, and I just dropped it for a while because I didn't hear back from David Antonelli. Come to find out, he was leaving, I guess, his position, and Wayne was coming in. So I just didn't hear back, so I figured it was just dropped. And I was told at the time that we were allowed to do all the short-term rentals that we wanted, but we could not rent it year-round, which really didn't seem to make any sense to me. So I said, well, if you want to try the Airbnb thing, we'll try it, And we did it for a couple of years, and, it was okay, but it's pretty much saturated. And so a friend of ours in town was going through housing. He's disabled and he's very sick. So somebody said, so-and-so needs an apartment. So I asked Carl, I said, well, why don't we talk to him and see if, he said he had a voucher. So I called him and I said, we may be able to help you out. And so he went to housing this spring, and we were told at housing that our problem was never resolved, and that in order to resolve it, we would have to apply for a variance.
So the Airbnb portion was after you had the issue with the...
Yeah.
Right, yes.
And yeah, but we
You tried
were-
something
yeah.
different, tried something different in between, and then the other gentleman wanted to come in, now you wanted to go back.
Go back, right.
Well, I heard this person that's been
I got it.
acquaintance needed housing, so we said, well, why don't we just give this up? It's kind of, we did it, we tried it like everybody else.
Yeah.
And I just feel that the neighborhood's safer because you don't have people in and out every weekend. And we only rent, when we rent through housing, it's single occupancy only, no smoking, it's just one person with one car, rather than short-term rental, which can be 2 cars and 2 people every week. So that's basically why we're here, because we were advised by building inspector, Mr. Pimentel, to come in and apply for a variance. And
So the apartment is now currently vacant?
We have a friend from Block Island that's staying by the week right now, which we were informed that it's still short term, so it was legal, but we don't have an Airbnb. We do have an insured, you know, as not two family, but two kitchens or something like that. So we've always insured it with, and we take, you know, we take good care of it. And our neighbors are fine with this. Like we said, there's been someone living in this apartment from the town probably since the time it was built.
Yeah.
And if you look at the site plan, I believe when this house was built, this was never a garage conversion. It's always been an apartment since the day it was built, the house was built. But if you look at the site plan, it's a funky little house on a funky little lot. And I believe, if you look at the top where the medical office building is, you can see where they took a whole chunk right out of the front yard, because the front of the house faces north. And I've seen on a paper map that Jean Street did go out, all the way out to Point Judith Road. And if you see this lot, you can see that they sold off about 3,500 square feet to put the parking lot in for the medical building. And at that time, that would have given them 150 feet.
So that's my next question. So
Yeah.
the property was sold prior to you owning it?
Oh, yes, that was
Yes.
Mastriani's.
Mastriani's.
And it was built in 1972, and that's when they put the medical buildings in, right around then. I think the medical building went in 1968, and I think they had to redo the parking lot, and you can see where they like dug the parking lot out. From the frontage of our front yard there, we have a hedge now for privacy, but then it dips right down about 10 feet into the parking lot. And then that little jog on the end, somehow they retained as the property for 26 Jean Street. On the back side, we have the big medical building. And I can see dumpsters from my house on both of those. So, I mean, we really didn't even think we'd stay here this long, but it did work out with our tenants. Mrs. Woodard stayed with us for 12 years. She became part of our family. We took care of her. The second tenant, Linda, was on disability. You know, again, she stayed with us for 11 years. And, you know, we prefer to have year-round tenants. And we just like to do this legally. We tend to do things legally. I'm above board. That's why we're here, and, you know, we don't want to move, we don't want to sell it. There's no ulterior motive here. We just want to continue doing what we were doing in good faith with the town. I did...
You lived with Narragansett, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we moved here in 1977, and the other thing is, we rented for 17 years, and it took us 17 years to afford to buy a house. So I feel for people that are renting, and I know in town right now there aren't enough renters. I'm on some of those Facebook groups for year-round rentals, so I see the need every single day. And it's just a shame that we have something that we can work through the town, and we get along great with Mike and Vicki and Christine, and they usually send us people that are a good fit. You know, I usually like a woman around my age, and I mean, it's always worked until this one person, you know, created some habits.
Pretty lucky, actually, you had it
Yeah.
all that time.
Yeah, but I mean, I did question it. And when the town started to, in 2013, the town decided to start registering rentals. And we went right down, paid the rental fee. I paid the rental fee every year. And I actually went into the building inspector's office. This was before David Antonelli, 2013. And I questioned them. I said, well, you know, there's a little bit of gray area here, and we work with housing, and I just don't know if, I don't want to be shooting myself in the foot now, because I'm registering something that I'm not sure if it's legal, but there's a gray area, or amnesty, or whatever you want to call it. And they said, oh no, you're good, this is all fine, everything's fine. And so we just continued, and it's been fine.
I was going to ask you that question.
Yeah.
So since 2013, it's been registered?
It's been registered. I fill out the registration form, I follow all the laws, I come in every year, I get it notarized, I write out my check, and it gets cashed. So, you know. And I also asked for a special use permit, or whatever we needed to do. I said, I just would like to get back into good standing with Mike and his crew, and just provide housing for someone. And this one person that's looking for a house now needs a lung transplant, and he's gonna be homeless because he lives in the pier, and he's losing his cottage that he's had for 12 years because it's gonna become like an Airbnb or something.
Well, the landlord needs it for her father.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah,
she
well-
needs it for her father, so
yeah.
this
So
gentleman
anyway,
needs a place to live, and that's what got us.
yeah. So that's why I said to him, let's just give up the B&B and we'll rent it and, you know, we'll go through housing. And then we got hit with, you know, you weren't resolved. So I've talked to Wayne a few times. And Wayne came by and inspected the apartment, right? Yeah. So, you know, we're in a little bit of a pickle.
Steve, question for you. If we were to approve this as a two-family, can we place restrictions on it as to how that
I
unit is
mean,
used?
yes, you can place restrictions. I mean, you couldn't restrict it to another. One of their options was to make it a quote-unquote affordable unit. You wouldn't be able to do that because that's a term of art that they'd have to go through Rhode Island Housing and have it deemed affordable. If they agree to it, that would make things certainly easier. What would be, what type of restriction would you?
Well, that's
propose?
exactly where I was going. Their intent is to continue to rent, sounds like to continue to rent through
Yeah.
Narragansett Housing. If the property turns over,
Yeah, I mean, based upon this testimony, well, one of the things I frankly just asked Wayne was that the second family was rented prior to 1989. Which obviously they bought it in 92, but I didn't know if there was a possibility that it's already a pre-existing non-conforming use because of the testimony that the second family, that second renter had been there prior to
What's
that
the point?
time.
Sorry, Steve.
I'm sorry.
Did you testify that, was it Mrs.
Woodard.
Mrs. Woodard,
Woodard?
yes.
She was there in 85?
85, we went to a dinner with this grad student I had met, and he invited us to his house, and we met Mrs. Woodard actually and her husband, and we had dinner at the house.
Well, we went to the wrong door and
Yeah.
we went to that door and she answered the door. And then it was odd that we ended up buying that house and she was there, but her husband was alive then. You might remember they used to walk around the Rotary all the time when they'd go shopping. But, yeah, she stayed with us another 12 years. I mean, I just felt that there was enough history here that this house, I think, was built legally, but there doesn't seem to be paperwork on it.
Jill, yeah, Jill just said, yeah, just check, that it's 1989.
What happened in 89?
No, it was earlier than that.
How old was Miles?
Miles was like
7. But that was in 97.
Yeah, October 11th.
He was still alive.
Non-conforming structures and uses.
So,
You, well, I hate to do this on the fly, and maybe, James, well, I'll do it on the record. I mean, the 10.1, which would require a special use permit for, you know, substandard lots on a two-family was enacted October 11, 1989. If the testimony that they've just given is that there was a two-family in existence in a substandard lot because the lot became substandard in 1972, then it would then be a pre-existing non-conforming use. However, this board, unfortunately, this board can't determine that. That has to come, if we don't have a record of it, it has to be by a superior court. So in other words, a zoning board doesn't have the authority to, if the town building official doesn't have anything on record, the only way to deem it a pre-existing non-conforming use is you gotta go to Superior Court and declare it declaratory judgment action. So that certainly seems to be a legal option, but I don't know if the other legal option is to ask for this. And you know, kind of dismiss that part. And frankly, it looks like they, but I mean, that's a whole process.
Right.
Yeah.
Wayne, is there any history on?
Other than I had gotten some documentation from the points relative to the previous occupancy from the tenants, and I don't know if you had provided letters to housing. Do you remember if you provided letters from the previous tenants attesting to that fact that they did rent during those time periods?
Well, Mike McLaughlin, I have somewhere in all of this, it did say that the housing director, Mike McLaughlin, submitted a letter saying that he's been renting with through us since 1992.
And it was constructed as a single family with an in-law at the time, and back then, you know, renting after an in-law passed or whatever was probably pretty common. Even, you know,
So it was
constructed that way.
constructed
As an in-law,
Yes.
not as a two-family.
right.
So I think we're back to, unfortunately, you gotta decide the relief as it's requested, because again, the only way to deem it a pre-existing non-conforming, if Wayne doesn't have records of that, which we don't have on file, is to go to Superior Court.
So right now, the town, there's nothing on file that shows it in your office?
Nothing that I could see conclusively of when it went from an in-law to being rented as a second.
Yeah, so the building official just has a one family with an in-law.
Yeah.
We don't have a two-family. So it's-
So back to, I think, just another take on Chris's question.
Yeah.
And something that you mentioned if they agree to. Could a variance be granted that would be extinguished on the sale of the house?
No.
Could not.
No.
No, back in the day, I've seen them, before I was a lawyer, you'd see these old variances, they expire in 5 years. You know, or when the tenant moves out, I've seen those, but no, you can't do that. But I've seen them.
Well, let me just take another whack at this. Could you adopt a condition that would require the owner to provide, essentially, it's through Narragansett Housing Authority?
Housing.
Through the housing? Require the owner to rent the second unit to a Narragansett Housing Authority? You might not want that from the point of view of selling your house at some point in time, but I'm just curious if you could do that.
Could you? I mean, is it rationally related to the relief requested based upon the testimony? I would say yes. I mean, it's not, you're not deeming, you're not pulling it out of, you know, thin air. And obviously they have the right at any time to abandon it, to rent it as an in-law apartment at any time. You know, the definition of an in-law apartment or accessory dwelling unit has expanded to pretty much anything, or short-term rental at this point. So given the fact that you're only limiting the rental to when it's a two-family, and the reasoning that they're giving is they want it to be a two-family is because Narragansett Housing requires that condition, I would say it is rationally related to the application, and not, you're not just trying to create affordable housing or, you know, things like that.
And I have a potential suggestion. The points are not exactly on a tight time frame for this. If we could acquire proof documentation from Narragansett Housing that Mrs. Woodard rented through Section 8 or Narragansett Housing from 1985 through 89. Would that be?
I mean, I could do some research, because Narragansett Housing is a town, I mean, it's town affiliated, so you're not bringing in from a separate thing. I mean, that might be a.
Would that be no
Then it would,
evidence?
yeah, so in other words, if the records reflected something before 1989 as a two-family, it would be a pre-existing non-conforming use.
Non-conforming use.
But it would have to be in town records. You can't bring in, if you're bringing in testimony from other places or whatever, that's where it has to go to Superior Court and you get a
Okay.
declaratory judgment.
But that would
It's
be,
gotta-
that would be sufficient, right?
That would-
If it's Narragansett Housing.
Exactly, yeah, and it would ultimately be Wayne's decision.
I would,
I mean, it's worth, it's worth continuing. I'd rather try to do that, given the scope of the issue.
I think I'm much more comfortable with that approach and the only way I would even consider it would be conditioned upon if we were to approve it, in my mind, it would have to be conditioned upon being rented through the housing authority.
Yeah, exactly, with a voucher.
And that would run with the property.
Yeah, so.
But I would much rather have it as a
No, I'll.
pre-existing non-conforming use.
Conforming use, I mean, the testimony tonight leads me to, it's just, we need the records in order to establish it at the town level, not, sounds like it's a no-brainer at Superior Court, but I'm sure they don't
Well,
want it.
Right.
you gotta get on the calendar.
But maybe James and I can work together they can try to do internal research and then put it on for a month or, no, that's up to you guys. You'll-
Certainly worth looking at, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What do we have for, what month do we, so it would be August?
It would be the August meeting. Your August meeting is pretty late right now.
August 17th.
It is, Mr. Chairman, August 17th.
Yes.
I did find something here from the project summary. That's a letter dated May 16th, 2023 from Narragansett Housing Authority was submitted indicating that this location has been occupied in the past with eligible renters from the HCV program. That's what Mike submitted. I don't have it. I thought it must have gone into our packet.
We have to get, James was
Yeah.
right, we've got to
Yeah,
get
but that's-
pre-1989.
Mr. Chairman, that letter is in your packet.
Oh, is it?
I didn't see it.
It is?
Maybe
Should
he
be.
expounded
It's in
on
my
that.
packet, it's the last one. Should be the,
Yeah, it doesn't,
It doesn't say?
it says 1993.
Must have been written with this disappearing ink.
It's not here.
I don't recall he said.
Some people have it, some people don't.
you guys need it?
If there's no date on it, it's not helping us.
Well, it says 1992, but that's
Oh,
only
it
for
says
now.
1990.
But
Yeah, but
it
that-
doesn't need to be rented to the housing authority from 1993. It needs to just be a two-family before
Right.
1989. So,
Any proof.
yeah, any proof, and keep in mind, they might have only looked for the points, not for the people.
Yeah.
Because if they said they inherited.
And anyway, it was 92, so that's not correct.
But when
They-
Mrs. Woodard had, when you took possession of the property, she was renting through
Yes,
Yes.
through
the housing
housing.
authority. So
Because we
chances
had-
are-
We had to go down and have the, you know, all the information transferred from the older owner to us.
Okay.
So we went down, I remember that day, and that was the day that I asked about this, so.
So,
Hopefully they have good records.
Yeah, that's the problem, I don't know that they do, so, because I've asked about 4 or 5
Yeah.
times for this, and we just we're not getting anywhere, so,
Okay.
you know, we have asked him for some documentation on all of our renters.
Prior to us buying the house.
That's different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right. So Chair would entertain a motion that we continue this to a date certain of August 17th.
So moved. Second.
Tony and Chris on the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, that motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Good,
Good
thank
luck.
you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, just check once you get on, shoot it to Wayne, just copy me.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. Nice seeing you again,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jill, do you have anything for us this evening?
No.
And just, at next week, we're all meeting, there's about 14 new zoning and planning, land use laws that were enacted. We're gonna meet next week, town staff, Mark, Jill, Tierney, Mark, everyone, and we're gonna try to come up with a plan to see how we're gonna enact them, and then at that point, we'll, have either a workshop or get, I sent some stuff to you guys in writing, but we'll try to figure out a good time for question and answer, and then it takes effect January, so we have a little bit of time, but not a lot. So it's gonna change a lot of things and how planning does things.
All right, Wayne, question for you. Since we're here on the Airbnb, what,
Yeah, why don't we, if it's
We don't-
specific, that, if it's not on the agenda.
oh, it's not on the agenda, okay, all
Yeah,
right.
so you certainly can talk to Wayne individually.
Yeah, I can explain, right?
Okay. Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Almond seconded. Mr. Brunetti made the motion. All those, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries 5-0.